During this conference, we have some important events evolving around the most pressing issue of our time, I believe, an issue which is pressing for the wider society, for the world, and also for the churches, including particularly the Orthodox churches. I would say that is the war in Ukraine and the peacemaking efforts in Ukraine. I chose to speak about this topic because I'm Ukrainian myself, and I do a lot of advocacy for the Ukrainian cause, also from the theological perspective, from the perspective of the Orthodox churches. The war is between the two people who claim to be Orthodox, and that's why we can call it an intra-Orthodox conflict, intra-Orthodox war. Unfortunately, it has not been addressed properly and sufficiently by the churches. At the same time, the peacemaking efforts, they involve the churches, and especially the Catholic Church. It started because the war started quite a long time ago in 2014, and then during the pontificate of the previous Pope Francis, he made a lot of effort to mediate in this war. He was approached, and he approached the fighting sides. He helped tremendously to solve some humanitarian issues when it came, for example, to the exchange of the prisoners of war, when it came to returning the abducted Ukrainian children back to Ukraine. So he was of great help. At the same time, he made some statements which some of them were appreciated in Ukraine, some were not exactly appreciated, and they were perceived as a bit confusing. Nevertheless, generally speaking, we appreciated his role in mediation and peacemaking. And now with the election of the new Pope, Pope Leo, he, on the first day of his inauguration as the Pope, where he made some important statements. He also met the Ukrainian President Zelensky. He also facilitated the meeting between the two presidents, the US President and the Ukrainian President, inside St. Peter's Basilica, which immediately attracted the attention of the global community and the churches to the efforts of the Roman bishop to mediate in the peacemaking effort. During the conference, that's why I decided, as I said, that's why I decided to speak about this, because it's happening during the conference, IOTA conference, and the IOTA conference, generally the IOTA platform, it's not just about theology, it's about our life, everyday life. It's about what is happening around us and inside the churches, and certainly the Ukraine war is one of the 40 of the IOTA interests and efforts. So during the IOTA conference at Angelicum on the Nicaea, some important steps happened relevant to the peacemaking process. On the first day of the conference, there was a phone call between President Trump and President Zelensky. There was a phone call between President Trump and President Putin, actually. And following that call, another call followed, the call between President Putin and Pope Leo the 14th, and they discussed a possibility of mediation for the Holy See, even though previously the Foreign Minister of Russia, Lavrov, responded to such possibilities that it would be inappropriate for the Catholic Church to host the two Orthodox peoples and countries to discuss the war, which was an interesting acknowledgement, and actually for the first time I believe that the Russian officials acknowledged that this is a war between the two Orthodox people, not just as the Russian propaganda used to present that this is the war of Holy Rus, the bastion of Orthodoxy against the evil West and the Catholic or pro-Catholic forces that try to destroy Orthodoxy, but that for the first time it was really an acknowledgement that this is a war between two Orthodox people, which was an important acknowledgement. But because of that, Lavrov then suggested that the Holy See would not be appropriate for such mediation. And then again, Putin called the Pope. It was the initiative of Putin, and they discussed, nevertheless, a possibility of such mediation. We in Ukraine perceive this mediation very positively because we really want this war to stop, to end. Of course, this war, for us at least, because the price has been paid too high, cannot stop just without any, I would say, condition. Our main condition that the peace should be just. The peace should be just, and this is the only precondition for the peace to be sustainable, because I believe firmly that peace without justice means a ceasefire, and every ceasefire ends with another, with the escalation of war, with another war. That's why for us to prevent future wars, we need justice, and I think that's something that really the Holy See can contribute through its mediation, by providing justice, by securing justice. And we in Ukraine are quite hopeful that in the time when justice doesn't seem to matter very much for the politicians, for example, I don't see the words from the vocabulary pertinent to justice, like in the speeches of the United States presidents, for example, or other politicians. They avoid speaking about justice, unfortunately. But the Holy See and the Church of Rome can be such a force to push for this vocabulary, to remind us of the importance of justice, especially given, and we in Orthodoxy, we also believe that justice is another name of God, and justice is crucially important. It's an important theological category in addition to everything else. So we really are hopeful that the See of Rome and the new pontiff, Pope Leo, who from the first day of his service expressed explicitly his interest in helping to end the war. We are hopeful in this. We are hopeful for this mediation. Now, I'd like to say a few words, maybe to connect or reconnect what I've just said with the topic of our conference, which is Nicaea, and we were talking a lot about the relevance of the Nicaea to our days. And I believe the Nicaea is relevant not just theologically, not just for the Orthodox Catholic dialogue, for example, which is very important, of course, but also for the for the wider developments. Even the war in Ukraine, I would claim, maybe too speculatively, but I would claim there is some relevance, because if we look at the Nicaea was convened by Emperor Constantine exactly to establish peace in a particular part of the empire, Egypt, which was torn by the conflict. The conflict was quite violent, we should say. There were theological ideas, like theological battles, but there were also outbursts of violence pertinent to those theological conflicts. And Nicaea helped actually to pacify, to bring peace, to bring some kind of mutual understanding and reconciliation in the province, which suffered from the theological debates, which were also underpinned by political agendas. We understand it now. Like, for example, Arius represented not just Egypt; he represented Libya, which was like a long-time rival to the church and political authorities in Egypt, and so forth. So there is a bunch of political underpinnings that had theological implications and resulted in the outbursts of violence. So Nicaea helped to solve those problems through the efforts of Emperor Constantine, but also the church representatives. That's why I believe Nicaea is relevant even to our days, because it gives us a pattern how to address the wars and issues, even though if they are not explicitly theological, but we can learn from Nicaea. This war in Ukraine is unfortunately not untheological, I would say. There is a theology behind it. I believe there is a wrong theology behind it. I call it political orthodoxy. It's a way of theological thinking which gives more attention to politics than to theology per se. When political agendas are dressed in, as it were, theological vestments, and there is a sort of wrong political theology behind this war. Also, there are some, I believe, there are some ideas, theological ideas behind this war that drive this war, which go back to the time of the Nicaea. Like, for example, I believe there is a very profound and wrong sort of dualism in the way how people who wage the war want to continue waging the war. Dualism is a very ancient teaching. It's primordial. It's a quintessence of polytheism, of paganism. It stems from paganism because most polytheistic systems, they teach that the world is divided in two parts, black and white, bad and good. And the goodness is kind of embedded intrinsically, essentially, in some parts of the world, and the evil is embedded in other parts of the world. So this is essentially the kind of the basics, the bottom line of the dualistic teachings. And when Christianity emerged from the Greco-Roman milieu, which was polytheistic, this milieu challenged Christianity with dualism, among many other things. And there were attempts to smuggle dualism into Christianity. And this dualism, these attempts were contested and addressed by the towering figures in the patristic theology, like St. Irenaeus of Lyon, for example, who became particularly famous for addressing dualism. And in his understanding, dualism was kind of the arch heresy, the heresy of all heresies, the mother of all heresies. I would agree with that judgment of St. Irenaeus. And the Nicene Council somehow had to deal with the aftermath of the theological battles against dualism. It doesn't mean, unfortunately, that dualism was extinguished altogether. It continued to exist in the Church, but the councils like the Nicene Council addressed the heresy of the heresies, the dualistic heresy. And this dualistic perception resurfaces again and again, even in Orthodoxy. And I believe one of the popular forms of the dualistic thinking is this counterposition between East and West, which is very popular in Orthodoxy when we confine our Orthodoxy, which is universal, which is a universal truth, that's what we believe, but we confine it to a very particular part of the world, like the East, whatever it means. We can't define what is East for us, but still we believe in it, and we sometimes perceive the East like the embodiment of all goodness, like essential, like ontological kind of incarnation of goodness, and we perceive the West sometimes as something ontologically evil. And this motivates some Orthodox, if not to wage a war, at least to support the war. I believe that one of the reasons why so many Orthodox, and we should acknowledge this, unfortunately, support the war of Russia against Ukraine is exactly this dualistic perception. They perceive the West as evil, trying to besiege, the good bastion of the East, which is kind of concentrated in Russia, or what they call Holy Rus. And that's how many Orthodox support Putin, support the war. And this is a theological question. This support has religious underpinnings. And that's another lesson that we can learn from the Nicaea, how to deal with these theological underpinnings behind the war. Also, these underpinnings have to do with ecumenicity, with our ecumenical thinking, because anti-ecumenism, I believe, which is also quite widely spread in the Orthodox world, it has the same dualistic platform, I believe. It's the fear of rapprochement with the other. It springs from the same perception that goodness is embedded in some parts of the world, in some countries, and evil is embedded in other parts of the world, and that's how people become anti-ecumenical. And I believe they become really anti-orthodox, because this contradicts the teaching of our church. It supports some heresies which were combated in our history, like dualism. In my own presentation, I made a statement that all the ecumenical councils which we in Orthodoxy perceive, and the same perception is in the Catholic Church, even though the Catholic Church has more ecumenical councils than we do, but still we share the same ecumenical councils, and all of them were ecumenical, not just in the sense of being universal, but also in the sense of being of dealing with Christian unity, restoring Christian unity, or trying to restore Christian unity. All of them, and I even tried quite speculatively, I would say, to measure the ecumenicity of the ecumenical councils, and I argue that most of them were highly ecumenical. Therefore, when we stand against Christian unity, when we challenge the ecumenical efforts by our hierarchs, by our churches, we essentially challenge the very nature of our church, of our orthodoxy. We challenge the authority of the ecumenical councils. And that is another, I think, that is another important lesson that we learn from Nicaea, because Nicaea, as the prototype of all ecumenical councils, all following ecumenical councils, were in the image and likeness of the Nicaea, and the ecumenicity of all following ecumenical councils, it just repeated the ecumenicity, the original ecumenicity of the Council of Nicaea. It teaches us to overcome this dualistic thinking, also in the perception of the other, of the Christian other. It also teaches us to be ecumenical, I believe. And I hope it's not just a wishful thinking. It's not, when we, stretch too much, the meaning of the Nicaea to our time. I firmly believe that they are connected, those things. Modern dualism that supports the wars, including the war of Russia against Ukraine, anti-ecumenical tendencies, which are very widely spread in Russia, and also they support this war, and they're widely spread in the global Orthodoxy. They also exist in the Catholic Church, as we know. There are some groups in the Catholic Church which are quite anti-ecumenical, but I think the common legacy of the Nicaea can help us to overcome those prejudices, I would say, that have, as I said, very practical and dangerous implications.